Jalek Rainwalker's life was an uphill battle from the very beginning. Born addicted to crack cocaine on the floor of his biological grandmother's Albany, New York kitchen in August of 1995, he was also diagnosed with fetal alcohol syndrome shortly thereafter. As a result, he was removed from his biological mother and placed into foster care 2 days after his birth. Jalek spent the first several years of his life going from foster home to foster after living in 5 different homes. He was lucky enough to eventually be placed with Jody and Larry Chauhan at age 3. The couple cared for Jalek for 4 years and had plans for adopting him. However, Jalek's difficult beginnings would derail this bright future. Jalek had been diagnosed with reactive attachment disorder, a condition that can develop in children whose emotional and physical needs were not met early on in their development. The condition can have a wide range of psychological and emotional symptoms. Broadly speaking, children with this disorder cannot properly accept affection once they are finally given it. They have trouble asking for help, are severely withdrawn, and respond to affection and interaction in inappropriate ways. In addition to his R.E.D., Jalek's fetal alcohol syndrome may have contributed to his behavioral problems. FAS, which is caused when a child's mother consumes alcohol during her pregnancy, can result in a broad range of physical and psychological complications. Children with this syndrome often have learning disabilities, poor reasoning and judgment skills, and hyperactive behavior. Any of these effects could complicate management of his R.A.D. The Chauhans have described Jalek as a loving and bright child who loved to read. Unfortunately, his psychological conditions did make caring for him difficult. When he became frustrated, Jalek was prone to violent episodes, where he was essentially unmanageable for up to an hour. The Chauhans spent 4 years helping Jalek try to live a normal life. However, when Jalek was 7, he attacked the Chauhans' biological daughter. At that point, Jody and Larry decided that they were not equipped to manage Jalek's condition after all and decided not to continue with their plans to adopt him. After leaving the Chauhan home, Jalek was sent to live with Jocelyn McDonald and Stephen Kerr, a married couple with 4 biological children and another foster child with special needs. 18 months later, the couple adopted Jalek, along with his foster sister. Jalek's life with McDonald and Kerr was somewhat unconventional. Their rural home in Washington County, New York, was a 2-room shack with no electricity, running water, or indoor plumbing. This was reportedly done out of the couple's concerns for the environment. All of the children were also homeschooled rather than sent to traditional school, although they did participate in small homeschooling groups with other families. McDonald and Kerr did not provide any care for Jalek's special psychological needs. During the time he was with them, he was not receiving any sort of counseling or put on any type of medication. This is in spite of the fact that they received roughly $36,000 a year from the state to provide for the care of their 2 adopted children with special needs. McDonald's own mother has publicly stated that while she believes her daughter and son-in-law began fostering children for the right reasons, they eventually were drawn to caring for children with special needs because of the additional income they provided. Jalek's problems again came to a head in February when he reportedly threatened a small child in the homeschooling group he and his young boy had been pestering Jalek, who had not been able to properly express his frustration and had instead lashed out with a threat of physical violence. Following this incident, Jocelyn McDonald no longer wanted Jalek in her home. Therefore, on February, Stephen Kerr called a crisis hotline. He told the caseworker he spoke to that Jalek was unmanageable and that he wanted to reverse the adoption. The caseworker told him that this was not possible. It in fact would have been possible to have Jalek removed from his family, but when Stephen hung up the phone that day, he believed that he had no legal means to remove Jalek from his home. At this point, Kara McDonald decided to take advantage of what is known as respite foster care. In respite foster care, a child is temporarily sent to live with a different licensed foster family during times when they are having difficulty with the family they have been living with. The break allows both the child and their families an opportunity to take a break and evaluate how best to improve their relationship going forward. On this occasion, Stephen Kerr took Jalek to the home of Elaine and Tom Person, who have provided respite care for Jalek since he had been 7. As respite care is only a short-term option, Jalek only stayed with Elaine and Tom for 6 days. When Steve and Kerr picked Jalek up from their home on November 1st, he told them that Jalek would be going to another respite foster home the following day. However, Jalek was going to have to stay with him for the night. Because Jocelyn still did not want Jalek in her home, Stephen took Jalek to his own parents' home on Hill Street in Green Ridge, New York. Stephen's parents were out of town at the time, so Stephen and Jalek were alone in the house. The following morning, just before 9 a.m., Stephen Kerr called the police to report his son as a runaway. According to Kerr, he had awoken at 7:30 a.m. on November 2nd and been unable to locate Jalek. He found a note from Jalek that read, "Dear everybody, I'm sorry for everything. I won't be a bother anymore. Goodbye, Jalek." Kerr believed Jalek to have been wearing blue jeans and a bright yellow fleece pullover when he went missing. He also stated that Jalek's duffel bag and his favorite stuffed animal had gone missing as well. Jalek's parents were only cooperative with authorities in the very early days of the investigation. They were interviewed by police on November 4th. On November 6th, Jocelyn McDonald complied with the request for her to take a polygraph examination, which she passed. On the same day, Stephen Kerr took the introductory portion of a polygraph but declined to complete the examination. The couple retained an attorney the following day. Kara McDonald held 2 vigils for Jalek, one on November 9th and one on November 16th. The latter vigil marked the last public showing of support for the search for Jalek by his parents. Stephen Kerr reportedly ripped down many of the missing persons flyers posted by volunteers and described Jalek as evil after he went missing. Concerns about Stephen Kerr's version of events sprung up almost immediately after Jalek went missing. Elaine Person, Jalek's respite foster mother, says that one of the assignments Kerr gave Jalek when he left him with her on that final stay was to write letters of apology to the people he had hurt. This included the students in the homeschool group where he was no longer allowed. While Elaine did not see the letters Jalek wrote, her husband Tom did see Jalek writing them. She believes the note Stephen Kerr gave the police was one of those apology notes. If Kerr knew what this note was, why did he misrepresent it to the police to support the idea that Jalek had run away? In February, Stephen Kerr was named a person of interest in Jolie's disappearance. According to authorities, they had video surveillance footage showing a gold minivan consistent with one Kerr owned driving through Greenwich around midnight when Kerr had claimed he was sleeping. Furthermore, cell phone data showed that Kerr had not taken the route to his father's home that he had detailed in his interview with police. The duffel bag and stuffed animal Kerr said Jalek had run away from home with were found inside the garage of Kerr's parents' home. Another contentious layer of the mystery of Jalek's disappearance was added in February, when a typed letter was mailed to several media outlets in the area where Jalek went missing. The poorly written letter claimed that Jalek was still alive. The only real detail that seemed to validate the letter was the reference to a cat named Diamond, which Jalek did have when he was living with his adopted family. The police accepted the letter as a lead, but those close to Jalek believe it to be a cruel hoax. According to Elaine Person, Jalek was too intelligent to have written such a grammatically incorrect letter. Compared to Jalek's handwritten letter given to police by Stephen Kerr, it certainly is at a much lower level of sophistication. In their investigation into the letter, police executed a search warrant on Stephen Kerr's father's home to take a computer into evidence. They were not able to determine if the letter had been written on that computer. Stephen Kerr and Jocelyn McDonald filed a lawsuit against the police department shortly thereafter, alleging that the search was improper and that police had illegally detained them during it. For months after Jalek went missing, his adoptive parents moved their family out of state. Greenwich police have been publicly very critical of Karen McDonald's lack of interest in their son's case. Chief George Bell of the Greenridge Police Department has stated in an interview that he has never seen such a lack of interest from the parents of a missing child. Kara and McDonald do not contact the authorities to check in on Jalek's case. While Jalek's adoptive parents have not displayed an interest in this case, others who love him have stepped up to fight for Jalek. Efforts to locate Jalek have been led largely by his adoptive maternal grandparents, Barbara Reilly and Dennis Smith. In the wake of Jalek's disappearance, when their daughter and son stopped cooperating with authorities, Reilly and Smith attempted to gain legal custody of Jalek so that they could expedite the investigation through their own cooperation. This move was without legal precedent in the United States and was ultimately unsuccessful. As a result of their involvement in Jalek's case, they have become estranged from their daughter and grandchildren. Soon after Kara and McDonald stopped cooperating with the police, Reilly and Smith helped form a task force to facilitate the search for their grandson. Also on the task force were Jalek's former foster parents, Jody and Larry Schoen, and Tom and Elaine Person. Elaine took a leave of absence from her job managing a small nonprofit to lead the task force and focus on efforts on Jalek's behalf full-time. These efforts included searches, media outreach, and fundraising to create a reward for information in Jalek's case. While Kara at McDonald did initially post a $25,000 reward for Jalek's return, it decreased by $5,000 every month and therefore was gone quickly. The task force relied on activities like bake sales and spaghetti dinners to raise funds for a new reward. A local deli offered a free weekly lunch for life to the person who could claim the reward, and a local business owner donated a $250 gift card to Walmart. While this pieced-together reward may not be large monetarily, the efforts made by the community to put it together are valuable beyond measure. Barbara Reilly's work on behalf of Jalek further chipped away at the validity of Stephen's account of Jalek's disappearance in February. As part of her own investigation, she decided to search the abandoned home site Jalek's family had been living in before they moved away. There, she found the yellow fleece pullover that Stephen claimed had gone missing with Jalek. Police, acting on Reilly's discovery, searched the home and removed a piece of clothing from it, although they did not disclose if it was in fact the yellow police. In response, Jocelyn McDonald had her mother arrested for burglary. In February 2012, state and local authorities held a press conference to announce that Jalek's case was being reclassified from a missing persons investigation to a probable child homicide. At the conference, they also finally confirmed that Jalek's yellow fleece had been recovered after he went missing and announced that they had just performed a new search with cadaver dogs based on a tip from the public. The search was unsuccessful. Jalek's adoptive parents did not attend the press conference. Barbara Reilly and Dennis Smith instead represented their grandson. Speaking through their lawyer, Karen McDonald expressed confusion at the reclassification. They still held their belief that Jalek was alive, having run away to live with a black family. Jalek was biracial, half African American and half white, and grew up in a county that was over 90% white. He therefore had few people around him who physically resembled him. Reconciling the two halves of his racial identity probably was difficult for a young boy with no real connection to one of those halves. McDonald and Kerr have stated that Jalek identified as black rather than biracial and probably ran away to live with other black people. It is understandable that Jalek would seek out black role models. However, the notion that he could have made his way to a more diverse area, much less remain hidden there for so long, at his age and with no resources, is essentially incomprehensible. Upon the reclassification of Jalek's case as a probable homicide, the authorities did not name any official suspects. However, as the last person to see Jalek, and the person whose account of events has faced so many challenges, Stephen Kerr falls under a cloud of suspicion for many. This includes Barbara Reilly, who bases her concerns on Kerr's history of anger management issues, which twice necessitated therapy. She alleges to have once witnessed Kerr become so angry with Jalek that he dragged him outside of their rural home and repeatedly dumped him in a nearby creek. If Kerr were involved with the foul play that Reilly believes took her grandson from her, she does not think that it was a premeditated act, but rather an impulsive act of rage. Even though authorities believe Jalek met with foul play, there are mixed opinions as to whether anyone could be convicted in relation to his death. Locating his remains would obviously make such a conviction much easier. When a partial skull was located in the area of Jalek's disappearance in the February, many hoped that Jalek could be laid to rest. Unfortunately, tests showed that the skull did not belong to the missing boy. A few of the investigators who have a more complete knowledge of the case than the public have stated to the media that they believe that there is enough evidence to successfully get a conviction in the case. However, until Jalek's remains are found or more witnesses come forward, it is unlikely that he will receive justice. 19-year-old Lindy Sue Beechler lived in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania in 1975. She had just recently got married. At about 8:45 p.m. on December 5, 1975, Lindy's aunt and uncle stopped by her apartment to exchange recipes. Instead, they found a horrific scene. There was blood on the front door, the entranceway wall, and on the carpet. They found Lindy's body on the living room floor. She had been stabbed 19 times with 2 different knives and assaulted. Investigators collected all forensic evidence they could at the crime scene. There were no signs of forced entry. Witnesses also didn't hear or see anything strange. In 1997, as DNA advanced, detectives with the Lancaster County District Attorney's Office submitted Lindy's underwear for DNA analysis. The lab found male DNA on it and could then create a DNA profile of the suspect. Recently, in 2019, investigators teamed up with C.C. Moore, who is the chief genetic genealogist at Parabon Nanolabs. Parabon created a composite sketch of the suspect based on the DNA evidence they had. In 2020, C.C. used DNA to build a family tree of the suspect. She found that he had deep roots in the local Lancaster community. She also found that the family tree of this unknown suspect contained many recent immigrant families from the tiny town of Gasparina, Italy. Finally, the search was narrowed down to 68-year-old David Sinopoli, investigators learned that Sinopoli lived in the same apartment complex as Lindy. To ensure that it was his DNA that was left at the crime scene, authorities began surveilling Sinopoli, who didn't go out much in public. On February 11, 2022, investigators were able to obtain Sinopoli's DNA from a coffee cup he drank from and threw in the garbage at the airport. DNA found on Sinopoli's coffee cup was compared to DNA identified from the male DNA on Lindy's underwear. In June, investigators learned that the 2 spots of blood found on Lindy's pantyhose was consistent with the DNA profile obtained from her underwear. Detectives had long believed that the suspect had cut himself during the attack. Sinopoli is being held in Lancaster County Prison without bail. Investigators do not believe Sinopoli and Lindy knew each other. It was just a crime of opportunity. The unsettling case of Christine Hatfield, an 18-year-old cold case that was finally solved in 2015, thanks to technological breakthroughs in forensic science. Oklahoma City, also known as OKC, is the capital and largest city in the state of Oklahoma, USA. This vibrant and dynamic city offers a unique blend of urban excitement and Midwestern charm. It is a place where modern amenities and a rich history seamlessly coexist. This city is home to major sports teams, including the NBA's Oklahoma City Thunder. Despite the tragic events of the Oklahoma City bombing in 1995, Oklahoma City has experienced fluctuations in its crime rate over the years, with crime rates being higher than the national average. And it was in this town that the incident happened, which shook the people to their core. To go back to where it began on February 12, 1989, Christian Hatfield was born to her mother Shannon Hatfield in Oklahoma County. Not much is known about who her father was. Shannon soon became a single mother, and she lived with Kristen's uncles while raising her daughters, Kristen and Faith. In 1997, Kristen was a second grader at Traub Elementary School in Midwest City, Oklahoma. On May 13, 1997, Kristen's mother Shannon Hatfield followed their usual bedtime routine and tucked Kristen and Faith into bed around 11:30 p.m. Little did Shannon know this would be the final moment she would see one of her daughters. She left the bedroom door slightly open and went to bed. Around 3 a.m. in the morning, she heard strange noises coming from the girl's bedroom. Though the thought of Faith talking in her sleep came to Shannon's mind, she still went to investigate. But by the time she reached the room, the noise had stopped. Oddly, she noticed that the door, which she had left slightly ajar, was now closed. Reluctant to disturb her daughters during the night, Shannon went back to sleep, a decision she would forever regret. The next morning on May 14, 1997, around 6 to 6:30 a.m., Shannon went to wake up her girls. Kristen's sister Faith was asleep nearby, but Kristen was not in her bed. She was missing. Shannon searched around the house. She asked Faith where Kristen was, but she knew nothing. Kristen's mother immediately called the police to report her disappearance. Except for the faint whining Shannon heard earlier, no one else in the house heard anything suspicious like a scream or signs of a struggle. It's believed that Kristen had already disappeared from her room at that time. Shannon heard the noise. If her mother had looked inside the bedroom when she heard the sounds of faint whining, she would have seen that Kristen was gone. They could have started searching earlier and perhaps discovered something sooner. But this was not realized until the next day when Kristen's mother noticed something unusual. The bedroom door was closed, which was not normal. The police initially considered the possibility that Kristen had left the house on her own during the night. They speculated that she might have gone to a friend's house, taken a walk around the neighborhood, or visited a nearby park. Although it may have seemed unusual, there were cases where children had left their homes at night and wandered around only to be found later. However, in Kristen's case, the police's assumption turned out to be incorrect, and their initial theory was proven wrong. Upon examining Kristen's room, the police noticed that her window was slightly open and found a small blood stain on the windowsill. They searched the house and the yard for clues. Outside, they discovered Kristen's bunched-up underwear against the fence, also stained with blood. It was evident that Kristen hadn't simply wandered off on her own. She had been abducted, putting her in immediate danger. The police understood the urgency of the situation and knew that time was critical. Kristen was last seen at 11:30 p.m. the previous night, and her disappearance was discovered at 6:30 a.m. the next morning. A span of 7 hours where anything could have occurred. The police quickly began searching the neighborhood, questioning neighbors about any sightings of Kristen or any unusual activity during the night. One resident reported hearing dogs barking around 2 to 3 a.m., but didn't find anything suspicious when he investigated. Blood samples from the underwear and windowsill were sent to the lab for analysis. Surprisingly, the results indicated that the blood did not belong to Kristen. It was from an unidentified male. Now, Kristen's mother was a single mom. Kristen and Faith lived in their uncle's house with her. Shannon also had a history of drug abuse. Kristen's uncles and their families were not very fond of Shannon. Considering Kristen's family issues, the police didn't exclude any family members as potential suspects or individuals who might have knowledge about her disappearance. They thoroughly investigated everyone and followed up on every lead and tip they received. However, none of these avenues yielded any significant information, leading to a quick stagnation in the case. Over the years, Kristen's name faded from the public conversation, and she became known as the girl occasionally featured on missing person flyers around town. Nonetheless, her family remained determined to find answers, and the police were equally committed to not giving up on the case. 18 years after Kristen's disappearance, in June 2015, a new team joined the investigation into Kristen's disappearance. Taking a fresh approach, they decided to resubmit the DNA samples found on the window and the victim's underwear to the database. With advancements in technology as time passed, they hoped to find a match. DNA analysis was still developing in the late 90s, so someone who wasn't in the system then might be now. Chief Brandon Claves of the Midwest City Police Department had an unwavering determination to solve the case. Detective Daryl Miller also felt a strong connection to it. Miller and Brandon agreed to work on the case together. They possessed a complete male DNA profile from the crime scene, matching the bloodstains on the window and the underwear. Their first step was running the DNA samples through COIDES, the Combined DNA Index System. Unfortunately, they did not find a match, but they remained hopeful. They had a list of approximately 100 men to consider since the DNA belonged to a male. They eliminate individuals who were clearly not involved and focused on those who seemed suspicious. They planned to visit them and collect DNA samples for comparison to the DNA found in 1997. One person of interest was a 55-year-old Anthony Palma, the neighbor who recalled hearing dogs barking around 2 to 3 a.m. on the night of the disappearance. Initially, he wasn't deemed suspicious during the questioning in 1997 when he was 38 years old. Palmer claimed he was at home when Kristen went missing, going to bed around 2 to 3 a.m. after hearing the dogs barking. In 1997, he was questioned due to his proximity to the Hatfield home and his alleged yard work for them, which he oddly denied. He also denied knowing Kristen's mother. In June 2015, investigators decided to revisit Palma. His wife mentioned his emotional reaction to Kristen's disappearance and his familiarity with the family. Palma recalled seeing a white Chevy truck at the Hatfield home the day Kristen vanished. He agreed to provide a DNA sample via a mouth swab. On July 22, 2015, the Oregon State Bureau of Investigation confirmed that Palma's DNA matched the DNA found at the crime scene. As investigators reviewed the old case file, they discovered discrepancies between the information provided by Palmer and the contents of the file. They couldn't find any documentation indicating that his house had been searched in 1997. Detective Miller received the results and he exclaimed, "Anthony Palmer was the killer." The DNA from the windowsill and underwear matched Palmer's. Despite his claims of being deeply affected by the case, he had lied to the police. They had never searched his home in 1997, raising suspicions about what might have been found then. Initially, Palma denied knowing the family, but Kristen's mother remembered a conversation with him that left her uneasy. However, in her heightened state after her daughter's disappearance, she hadn't considered him a likely suspect and viewed everyone as strange and suspicious. But the friendly neighbor, Palma, already had secrets hidden in his life's history. Anthony Palmer was born in 1959. The police found out that Palmer had already served a year and a half of a 5-year sentence, long before he even lived beside the Hatfields. During his trial, another woman testified that Palmer had drugged and assaulted her when she was 17. This revealed a pattern of troubling behavior. Authorities then delved into Palmer's past and found disturbing incidents. In 1980, he was suspected of breaking into his girlfriend's sister's bedroom, assaulting her and escaping before getting caught. The police saw his truck parked nearby but lacked evidence for an arrest. He violently assaulted and attacked his landlord, leading to a conviction for assault and battery. Shockingly, Palmer had been living near the Hatfields' home for 7 years. Christian was just 1 year old at the time he had moved there. Authorities were both thrilled to connect him to the case and stunned that he had been right under their noses all along. The impact on the family could only be imagined. Returning to the case by October 12, 2015, the investigators had gathered enough evidence to interview Palmer. They asked him if he remembered anything unusual about the day or even before Kristen's disappearance. Palmer responded by denying any involvement with Kristen or her family, except for seeing a white truck in front of their yard. He claimed that he typically spent his time working on his yard and fixing neighbors' bikes, but denied calling the kids over to his house. He mentioned having a daughter named Christy, who often played with the neighborhood kids. When asked if he had seen Kristen and her mother Shannon around the neighborhood, Palmer claimed to have seen Kristen playing with another girl named Crystal, but he couldn't recall the specific time frame. He stated that he was generally cautious around people and didn't pay much attention to who was there. Palmer denied having any interactions with Kristen, never recalling helping her with her bike or talking to her. He asserted that he didn't know Kristen or her family and wasn't aware of how long they had lived there. On the night of May 13, 1997, Palmer said he didn't leave his house. He mentioned that his dog barked at the back fence, assuming it was due to the presence of other animals or dogs in the area. Palmer didn't investigate further and simply called the dog inside before going back to bed. Palmer expressed suspicion towards Shannon for leaving the house, believing that she should have stayed in case Kristen returned or received a call. Palmer brought up Shannon's drug use and mentioned allowing her brother, who was helping search for Kristen, to stay at his place temporarily. When asked if Shannon's brother confided in him or provided any useful information, Palmer denied it. During the interview, the investigators confronted Palmer with the DNA evidence. His DNA was found on the windowsill of Kristen's room and on the underwear discovered in the backyard. Despite his earlier claims of never being in the backyard or having any contact with Kristen, Palmer's repeated denial and lack of explanation for his DNA being present raised suspicions. Although there could be legitimate reasons for his DNA to be found in someone else's backyard, Palmer's previous statements contradicted the evidence, leaving him with no credible explanation. After 18 years, on October 12, 2015, the same day after his interrogation, Anthony Palmer was arrested and charged with the kidnapping and presumed first-degree murder of 8-year-old Kristen Hatfield. During the trials in 2017, he pleaded not guilty, but on October 13, 2017, he was found guilty. On November 27, 2017, the jury convicted him and he received a life sentence without parole. Surprisingly, he chose not to appeal his conviction, which is unusual for someone claiming innocence. Despite multiple opportunities, Palmer refused to disclose the location of Kristen's remains. Shannon, Kristen's mother, wrote to him in prison 3 times, but he asked her to stop. On January 11, 2019, Palmer was strangled to death by a cellmate who was serving a life sentence for first-degree murder. He was 59 years old. Although Palmer likely knew where Kristen's remains were, the family still hoped that someone else might have received that information and will come forward. Shannon displayed compassion by expressing forgiveness and not wanting Palmer's life to end in such a manner. The case was considered solved, although the location of Kristen's body remained unknown. One lead suggested her body might be buried in a neighboring town, but a search yielded nothing. Palmer's house was thoroughly searched inside and out, but no evidence was found. Inside the house, they did find children's teeth, but they belonged to Palmer's own daughter, as he had kept them after playing the Tooth Fairy. Kristen's family chose to forgive Palmer for what he had done, hoping that their forgiveness would lead him to reveal the location of Kristen's body. Unfortunately, he never did. She had already expressed her forgiveness in a letter to Palmer, wishing he would find it in his heart to provide the information they sought. The abduction of Kristen Hatfield was a case that made the alliance of forensic science with criminology more substantial. But Kristen's body is still not found. The case of Matthew Patrick Matt Podolak. Matthew Patrick Matt Podolak, born June 10, 1975, in Ohio, USA, to Patricia Romano and Leonard Podak. In high school, Matthew was a member of the hockey team. After graduating, he enlisted in the U.S. Navy and later worked at Phoenix Industrial Finishing, a company owned by his uncle. Although this provided opportunities for advancement, but Matthew encountered difficulty to connect with his co-workers, who may have felt jealous of his privileged position. His sister, Chrissy Duca, attributed the tension was partly due to rumors of a possible promotion, which his colleagues believed he did not deserve. Outside of work, Matthew was an outdoors enthusiast who enjoyed activities such as boating, camping, and hunting. He also played softball and hockey during his free time. In 2003, Matthew met Holly McFeature, and they began dating shortly after, eventually they moving in together in Cleveland. The relationship marked a new chapter in Matthew's life. Friends said that he was eager to settle down and start a family. Matthew and Holly had 2 children together, Samantha and Josh, and also raised Holly's child from a previous relationship as part of their family. Matthew's mother, Patricia, said he loved Holly very much, and his feelings for her were sincere. Matthew's life underwent a drastic change when he transformed from a bachelor to a father of 3 in a short period. Initially, his relationship with Holly was filled with love and mutual understanding. However, by 2005, their romance had turned sour, becoming increasingly argumentative and strained. On multiple occasions, Matthew would leave home after a fight with Holly and spend the night with a friend. Friends, who had grown concerned about the relationship, advised Matthew to end things with Holly, citing her selfish behavior as a major red flag. Despite their warnings, Matthew refused to listen and continually returned to Holly. Furthermore, Matthew had taken out a life insurance policy that named Holly as the beneficiary. Despite the advice of friends to remove her from the policy, Matthew did not make any changes. During this time, Matthew's behavior was erratic, which ranged from extreme happiness to intense anger, upset, and fear. According to Matthew's best friend, Russell, he had become depressed during this time. However, he seemed overly optimistic about his future, particularly when it came to raising his 3 children, a prospect that filled him with both hope for the future. Russell advised Matthew to take precautions and remove the guns from their home due to the volatile situation they were in. After the hockey season ended in 2006, he started online gambling, which resulted in him losing a lot of money. His family and friends noticed that he was struggling with depression and advised him to see a doctor. He followed their advice and was prescribed antidepressants. By the spring of 2006, Matthew's health started to deteriorate. His condition worsened by Memorial Day weekend, causing Russell to become extremely concerned about Matthew's physical well-being. Around that time, Russell had asked he for help transferring a motor from one boat to another. However, he was no longer the strong person he once was, experiencing severe back pain and complaining of excessive sweating and a lack of strength. Russell urged Matthew to see a doctor and recommended Dr. Thomas Mandat. He scheduled an appointment with Dr. Mandat for July 26, 2006. On the day of the appointment, he called Russell to ask for directions to the doctor's office. During their conversation, Russell could hear Holly arguing with Matthew in the background. Matthew visited the doctor, complaining of back pain. After examining him, Dr. Mandat diagnosed he with kidney stones and prescribed medication to help pass the stones and alleviate the associated pain. In a phone call to his father on the afternoon of July 30th, Matthew shared his excitement about buying a new fishing rod for his daughter. He was looking forward to taking her fishing, hoping they could go together soon, along with his father. Matthew's anticipation for their upcoming family outing were evident in the conversation with his father. On the evening of the same day, Matthew attended a party with Russell. He found Matthew's health condition alarming. Matthew had gained significant weight, was sweating excessively, and struggled to walk. Matthew also complained of severe back pain. Later that evening, Matthew's condition worsened, and Holly became concerned. She called 911 and then contacted Matthew's father, informing him that something was wrong with his son. Matthew's father had a brief phone conversation with him and found he to be confused and very distressed. Matthew was rushed to the emergency room at Parma General Hospital, where doctors suspected he was experiencing organ failure. Tests revealed that Matthew's kidneys had failed and he was suffering from metabolic acidosis, a condition where the blood becomes highly acidic. Dr. Mandat, an emergency room doctor, suspected that Matthew had ingested a toxic substance, such as methanol or antifreeze. When questioned, Holly denied the possibility that Matthew had swallowed antifreeze or medical alcohol, asserting that he had not consumed anything that could have caused harm. On July 31, 2006, Matthew passed away at the hospital due to kidney failure. According to Dr. Mandat's testimony, Matthew's death was not caused by respiratory problems, as metabolic acidosis typically is. Instead, Dr. Mandat explained that ethylene glycol can also cause this condition. After Matthew's death, his family and friends were overcome with grief, but Holly seemed unaffected. In the days that followed, her friend Rebecca Vega tried to offer support and accompanied her to the funeral home. However, Vega noticed that Holly did not feel sad at all. At the wake, Matthew's father had to ask Holly to join the family in the main room to receive visitors, and even then, she appeared to be unfeeling and indifferent. Russell recalled that Holly acted like it was a normal gathering, showing no signs of grief. The day after Matthew's death was particularly telling. Holly used Matthew's bank card to withdraw money from an ATM and wrote checks in his name, draining his bank account. When Matthew's mother reported Holly's suspicious behavior to the police, Holly was arrested and charged with 2 counts of forgery. She later agreed to restitution and was placed on probation for 1 year. Holly was the beneficiary of Matthew's life insurance policy, although the policy was relatively small and she received only $10,000 after his death. 2 weeks later, her friend Rebecca visited Holly and noticed various cleaning supplies, including what appeared to be solvents, left out in the open. Since there were small children living in the house, Rebecca found this absurd and asked Holly about it. She calmly explained that one of the items was antifreeze, which Matthew used to winterize his boat. However, Russell disagreed with this and stated that Matthew's boat had not been operational since its engine broke down in 2004 or 2005. Holly's demeanor after Matthew's death raised concerns with others. For example, she had an intimate relationship with Michael Gima, a Cleveland police officer who would often visit her home for coffee. Michael had known Holly since 2002. One day, Michael called Holly to ask if he should come to her house at this time. She replied that there was no need to worry about it anymore because Matthew died last week without showing any emotion. She attributed Matthew's death to kidney issues and pain from playing hockey, but her tone came across as careless and heartless. Following Matthew's death, his belongings were removed from the house. Holly asked a friend to erase some content from Matthew's computer and then cut up his clothes to make a quilt. 6 weeks after Matthew's passing, Holly began dating Charles Liffam, a Cleveland police officer. Initially, she told Charles that Matthew had died from kidney failure. However, after the autopsy report was released in January 2007, she changed her story. The autopsy revealed that Matthew had an unusually large amount of ethylene glycol in his system, the key ingredient in antifreeze. Later, Holly told Charles that Matthew might have intentionally taken something to end his life. The autopsy report confirmed that Matthew died from chronic ethylene glycol intoxication, but the coroner was unable to determine how or why he ingested the substance. It's worth noting that Holly told Charles that she didn't know what antifreeze was. Holly also provided conflicting explanations for Matthew's death, telling friend Sean Walsh that Matthew had died in an industrial accident. She also said that one of his co-workers might have poisoned him out of envy due to his connection to the boss. However, Matthew's family suspects that the truth behind his death may have been caused by someone close to him. This skepticism is partly due to Holly's indifferent attitude at the funeral, which contrasted with claims from Holly's sister that she had been crying in the car beforehand. During the investigation, detectives discovered 2 bottles of antifreeze in the garage of the house Holly had relocated from, which they took into evidence in 2007. The findings were recorded in a police report. Later in 2007, after parting ways with Charles, Holly met Jameson Kennedy while working at a bar. As they started dating, Holly chose not to share any details about Matthew's death with Jameson. However, Jameson has a troubled past with multiple convictions and struggles with addiction. One evening in September 2008, Holly and Jameson were together, consuming alcohol and take action intimate. According to Jameson, Holly became emotional. She began crying and confided in him about Matthew's death. She expressed her desire to leave Cleveland and put the past behind her, confessed to putting something in Matthew's drinks that made him ill and ultimately led to his death. However, Jameson was unsure if she was telling the truth. Seeking advice, Jameson met with his friend Santiago Feliciano, a lawyer, and shared Holly's confession with him. Santiago recommended that Jameson report this information to the authorities if he believed it to be true. Jameson then called Holly to discuss her earlier confession, unaware that their conversation was being recorded. He hoped she will turn herself in and admit that she is the one who caused Matthew's death. Instead, Holly vehemently denied ever harming Matthew, claiming Jameson was misinterpreting her. The conversation between Holly and Jameson caused a rift in their relationship. Jameson began to suspect that Holly was cheating on him. On November 8, 2008, Jameson went to her house to confront her. Feeling threatened, Holly called the police. When the officers arrived, Jameson attacked them and was subsequently arrested and charged with assault. Jameson was sentenced to 10 years in prison after being found guilty of assaulting officers. Following his arrest, he informed the police about a confession he'd have heard from Holly, reportedly linking her to the death of Matthew. This added to the evidence of Holly's involvement in Matthew's death. The police initially investigated the death in 2007 after the autopsy report was released. But the case stalled for many years because they initially did not consider it an intentional act. Re-examine the case, it is essential to look at the autopsy report. Dr. Galita, an experienced forensic pathologist and medical examiner, conducted the autopsy. Then, Dr. Galita and County Coroner Dr. Elizabeth Balch released their autopsy report in January 2007. The report determined Matthew's death was caused by chronic ethylene glycol poisoning, although the circumstances surrounding it were unclear. When Matthew ingested ethylene glycol, it entered his bloodstream and was quickly broken down by his liver using an enzyme called alcohol dehydrogenase. This process converted the ethylene glycol into oxalate, which then combined with calcium to form sharp calcium oxalate crystals. A large number of these crystals accumulated in Pack's kidneys, causing a blockage that disrupted their function. According to Dr. Galita, the severe pain Matthew experienced in his side starting on May 20, 2006, was likely caused by the crystals in his kidneys. When Dr. Galita examined Matthew's kidneys, he found two significant things. In addition to kidney damage, there are signs that the kidneys are beginning to heal. Further examination revealed the emergence of the crystals in Matthew's heart and brain, as well as severe acute myocarditis. Myocarditis is an acute inflammation of the heart muscle. The doctor stated that Matthew's myocarditis could not have been caused by an ingestion of ethylene glycol. Instead, the inflammation would have taken at least 3 weeks to develop. He also ruled out a heart attack as the cause of death. In conclusion, Dr. Galita determined that Matthew's death was the result of long-term ethylene glycol poisoning. He believed a series of but acute toxicity episodes, occurring over at least a 3-month period, ultimately led to his death. Matthew often drank iced tea at work, particularly raspberry flavor. He usually brought it in a thermos or the container. A Matthew's friend, Michael Mao, testified that Holly frequently brought Matthew lunch at work. His meal often came with a half or whole gallon container of iced tea. The police found 2 bottles of antifreeze in the garage of Holly's former home in August 2007. The bottles, one a Peak brand and the other a Saturn brand, were discovered after she had moved out. 3 years after Matthew's autopsy results were released, and report amendment was made to the report in 2010. The revised report, signed by County Coroner Dr. Frank Miller, confirmed that Matthew died from poisoning by ethylene glycol, a toxin found in antifreeze, in long-term and deemed the death a homicide. 6 years after Matthew's death, the authorities decided it was time to arrest Holly. She was formally charged in July of that year with the serious offense of depriving Matthew of his life. Holly's charges came as no surprise to Matthew's family. According to his older brother, Mark, they suspected Holly's involvement in his younger brother's death all along. Mark stated that Holly's behavior around the time of the death raised suspicions, saying she just wasn't acting like somebody who was losing a loved one. Authorities suspected that Holly had been secretly poisoning Matthew by adding antifreeze to his cold raspberry tea for several weeks or even months. In 2013, she went to court, pleading not guilty to the charges. However, there was no direct evidence, only indirect indications of her guilt. To prove their case, the prosecution called 15 witnesses to testify. These witnesses included Matthew's family and friends, Dr. Galita, who conducted the autopsy, Dr. Thomas Mandat, who was Matthew's doctor, and several police officers who investigated the case. Witnesses focused on several key points, including Holly's suspicious actions, a phone call Matthew made before visiting the doctor, and the fact that Matthew had not owned a functioning boat since 2004, which meant he had no use for antifreeze. Holly's defense team countered by stating that Matthew's family and friends had prejudged her as guilty and then pressured law enforcement to bring charges against her following Matthew's death. The prosecution's strongest testimony came from Dr. Galita, the medical examiner in charge of performing the autopsy. Dr. Galita provided a detailed explanation for his conclusion that Matthew was the victim of chronic poisoning over a period of 3 months. He arrived at this conclusion because on the emergence of crystals in Matthew's kidneys and myocarditis, a type of inflammation of the heart muscle that can be caused by exposure to ethylene glycol. After ruling out causes other of myocarditis, such as infection, Dr. Galita emphasized that Matthew's condition could not have been the result of a single short-term exposure to ethylene glycol. Dr. Galita also clarified why the initial autopsy report, completed in 2007, did not indicate that Matthew's death was intentional. He explained that, at the time, the coroner's office did not have enough information to make this determination, which led to the manner of death being listed as undetermined. However, after further investigation, the report was revised. The testimony of other witnesses supported Dr. Galita's findings. Matthew's friends reported that his health began to decline in the spring of 2006, which was confirmed by his diagnosis of kidney stones in July 2006. The friends also described a volatile relationship between Matthew and Holly, stating that Matthew seemed fearful and had removed his firearms from the home at the advice of a friend. Holly's lawyers claimed that their client was not involved in Matthew's death, suggesting instead that Matthew's depression led him to end his life. According to the defense, Matthew was struggling with losses from online gambling, work-related issues, and difficulties communicating with his child, ultimately leading him to deliberately ingest a lethal dose of antifreeze. The defense argued that Matthew died from a single dose of antifreeze rather than from prolonged exposure over several weeks or months. In support of this theory, they brought Dr. Robert Lux to testify in court, the coroner from El Paso County, Colorado. Dr. Lux testified that Matthew's death was a result of acute poisoning due to a single ingestion of ethylene glycol, indicating a possible suicidal intent. He disputed Dr. Galita's diagnosis of myocarditis and instead believed Matthew had suffered a heart attack. Furthermore, Dr. Lux explained that myocarditis can occur independently of ethylene glycol poisoning, and that flank pain is not typically a symptom of ethylene glycol poisoning. He said that there was no connection between kidney stones and ethylene glycol poisoning, a relevant detail in the case. Several key witnesses testified during the trial. One notable witness was Jameson Kennedy, a felon who had been serving a 10-year sentence for assaulting police officers. Jameson claimed that Holly had confessed to him that she had mixed something into Matthew's drinks. However, Holly denied ever making such a statement. Holly argued that Jameson's testimony was motivated by a desire for leniency in his own case or revenge against her. After 3 days of deliberation, the jury delivered a guilty verdict on all counts. On August 28, 2013, the court sentenced Holly McFeature to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 30 years. The case of Brett Ryan. Brett grew up in a prosperous and large Canadian family. His parents, Bill and Susan, had 4 sons. Brett's parents tried to teach him through their own actions. His father held a prestigious job at the Toronto Star daily newspaper and had various hobbies like sports, yoga, and psychology. Likewise, Susan was very hardworking. Their entire household rested on her shoulders. She not only devoted time to her husband and children, but also managed the huge house in Toronto's prestigious area without any help from gardeners or craftsmen. Just like his older brothers, Brett went to university after high school. He always aimed to be better than his siblings, so he advertised painting services in a local newspaper for Toronto residents' houses and fences. Initially, things went well. He made his first earnings and Susan was proud of him, often using him as an example for others. However, making money as a part-time job is one thing. Dropping out of university to spend all your time inhaling paint fumes without proper education is another matter altogether. After some time in university, Brett decided to drop out. For the first couple of years after this decision, Brett still felt confident compared to his older brothers. After a while, when Christopher and Leland graduated and found jobs in their fields, Brett's authority began to wane. Christopher started working for the City of Toronto Transit Commission and Leland became the family artist and designer. Following their studies, they moved out of their parents' home. Brett, to avoid spending part of his earnings on rent, stayed with his father, mother, and younger brother who attended a school for gifted children. With each passing year, Brett grew more desperate due to his mounting debts and his inability to pay them off. He developed depression. By 2007, when Brett was already 26 years old, his debt had ballooned past $60,000. Although Brett was considered an intelligent individual, he did not know how to effectively use his mind. He always put on a cheerful face and helped everyone around him. He was a participant in volunteer initiatives. Consequently, no one could fathom the depth of despair within him. Eventually, a fateful moment arrived when nothing could be done. On October 28, 2007, Brett had no work orders for house painting or any other tasks around the house. Orders were always scarce in the fall, since everyone typically painted their houses in spring or summer. With winter approaching and no prospects for earnings, there was no time to wait. Brett donned all the old clothes he had in his closet, a hat, a long sweater from his older brother, and a scarf knitted by his mother. This particular scarf was comically long. Brett hadn't worn it before, but now found it useful. He wrapped it around his face, leaving only a narrow slit for his eyes, and headed for the bank, located on the outskirts of his neighborhood. Clutching a thick folder, Brett waited for his turn at the bank. When an employee finally summoned him, he approached her and quietly informed her that he had a gun with him. He instructed her to take all the money out of the bank's cash register and give it to him. The girl, shaken with trembling hands, handed him all the cash from the register. Brett then quietly exited the building to avoid drawing the attention of the guards. Once outside, he ran. Upon counting the stolen money, he realized it amounted to just over $1,000. This sum was far from sufficient to clear his debts. He calculated that robbing about 60 banks would be necessary to meet his financial obligations. Despite how improbable that seemed, he saw no alternative. In the initial days following the robbery, Brett was consumed with fear that the police might track him down. To avoid detection, he refrained from going home and informed his mother that he had a job in a neighboring town. Instead, he spent nights in his car, cautiously approaching his house periodically to check if any police cars were hidden nearby. Each visit confirmed silence and no signs of pursuit. This reassured Brett that his plan was working. The success of the first robbery led to more, a second, a third, and a fourth. Each time, Brett took precautions to change his appearance by wearing different clothes, purchased secondhand or even retrieved from trash, and burning them afterward. He also invested in a fake beard from a costume store, since bank employees always mentioned his beard in their testimonies. News outlets in Toronto began covering stories about the bearded robber, but despite this notoriety, he never managed to gain substantial amounts through these crimes, the most being just $3,000 per robbery. Brett hit a snag when police identified his vehicle on surveillance cameras and traced it back to his residence. Lacking solid evidence for an arrest, law enforcement decided simply to monitor him closely. For about 15 days following this new development, Brett refrained from further robberies, even though no more than 3 or 4 days typically passed between crimes before this. His unusual hiatus led some officers to believe they were tailing an innocent person and wasting resources on a dead end. But then fortune turned in favor of law enforcement. Brett left the house, got into a car, and later exited not far from the bank. Wearing a different and unusual outfit, he entered the branch and remained there for some time. Upon leaving, he was immediately apprehended by the police, who announced that the much-discussed bearded robber had finally been caught. Brett had been under investigation for 7 months and was charged with armed robbery. Interestingly, despite having a gun permit, the bearded robber always entered the bank unarmed. He did not even carry a kitchen knife. In total, he faced 19 charges and was subsequently imprisoned. Brett and his family filed multiple appeals, which led to only 8 of the 19 counts being upheld. However, Brett didn't stop there. At the first opportunity to apply for parole, he submitted a petition. In it, he requested consideration of his severe depression, caused by 2 failed relationships and substantial debt. Additionally, he emphasized that he committed these crimes without intending to harm anyone and without carrying any weapons. His remarks were taken into account. However, to secure early release from prison, he had to undergo sessions with a psychologist. These sessions had a positive impact on Brett's behavior and mindset while incarcerated. During this period, he did not communicate with his family but eventually took steps to mend those relationships. The positive changes in Brett were recognized by the commissioners overseeing his case. Consequently, on November 24, 2010, Brett was released from prison. Nonetheless, this hard-won freedom turned out to be more challenging than anticipated. Before becoming known as Brett the Bank Robber, he was simply a painter burdened with personal struggles. Post-incarceration life proved difficult. Few companies were willing to hire an ex-convict with such a tainted background. Even when hired for house painting services, clients would cancel upon recognizing him as the infamous bearded robber. The social repercussions extended to his family as well. Neighbors who once praised Susan's garden began spreading unpleasant rumors about them. The Ryan family decided to sell their house hastily and move to Scarborough, where Susan started cultivating her new garden afresh. Despite these challenges, Brett managed to find employment at a trading company. However, his salary was modest. His parents also assisted financially in helping him rebuild his life and continue his university education. Brett continued to see a psychologist. Each session, the specialist advised him not to sever ties with his family. The psychologist's advice proved effective. However, Brett's financial situation remained precarious. Then, in September 2011, a significant positive event occurred in his life. He met Kristen Baxter. Kristen was an exceptional girl. She owned an apartment with windows that offered a stunning view of the sea, which provided the young couple with a picturesque landscape to enjoy. She was also athletic, maintaining excellent physical condition. Crucially, she was unconcerned about Brett's past. As a couple, they traveled periodically and had even visited Australia. Brett's parents were delighted to observe his relationship with Kristen flourish. They were confident that Kristen would encourage him to advance in life and secure his place in society. Life seemed to improve for Brett until his father passed away. This loss profoundly affected him and triggered a return of depressive symptoms. Consequently, he had to increase his visits to the psychologist and spend time supporting his mother, both emotionally and financially, despite his limited resources. Realizing that their relationship needed to advance beyond casual dating, given their maturity, Brett decided to make a commitment to Kristen. He had saved some money and discussed his intentions with his mother. He expressed his desire to propose to Kristen, the goal being a memorable proposal she couldn't refuse. Understanding her son's intention, Susan provided additional funds for him to purchase an engagement ring. Notably, the couple had previously discussed their future together, and it was clear that Kristen did not require an extravagant gift or similar symbols of commitment. Brett's proposal to Kristen meant the world to her, signaling his serious intentions. Despite this, he decided to go the extra mile and purchased a gold ring adorned with a sizable diamond for his beloved. Naturally, Kristen accepted his proposal. From there, they began planning their wedding. Brett, agreeing with all of Kristen's decisions, nodded in approval. However, the rising costs and financial implications unsettled him. He started worrying about his career prospects and financial stability. Determined to secure a stable job, Brett found an engineering position at a prominent tech company online. He meticulously prepared his resume and applied for the job. To his delight, he was invited for an interview and subsequently received a job offer. Elated by the news, Brett shared it with Kristen and his mother. Eager to make a good impression at his new job, he asked his mother for money to purchase an expensive suit. As always, she didn't refuse him. Yet, just when everything seemed perfect, Brett received a disappointing call from the company. Their security team had uncovered details of his criminal past, leading them to rescind their offer. This news hit Brett hard. It was like a bolt from the blue. His spirits dropped immediately. Frustration set in as he considered the futility of ongoing interviews, each ending in rejection due to his past. Faced with repeated setbacks, Brett decided that rather than continuing with futile efforts and investing time in studies that seemed pointless due to his tarnished record, he would use the funds allocated for university studies on their wedding instead. Brett thus found himself back where he had recently escaped from, but kept certain truths hidden from loved ones, including dropping out of university and being rejected from the engineering role. He maintained appearances by dressing in professional attire each morning before heading to paint houses, changing clothes en route. To further sustain this facade among friends and family, Brett frequently updated his social media profiles with pictures seemingly originating from an office environment or business events, images sourced off the internet, and would even pretend he was resolving urgent work-related matters during family gatherings by faking phone calls regarding work issues. In September 2016, after a 5-year relationship with Kristen, Brett sought to plan a wedding. He demonstrated a remarkable ability to conceal his true situation, successfully creating the illusion of a stable life. Despite being a common painter, he projected an image of success and prosperity. He agreed to rent an expensive restaurant requiring $100 per guest. The entire Ryan family was thrilled seeing Brett's apparent transformation. A prestigious job, a fancy apartment, and an attractive bride. However, the truth of Brett's deceit was far more complex. With the wedding just a month away, Brett needed funds for the event. He repeatedly borrowed money from his mother until she could no longer assist him financially. Desperate, he even demanded that she seek higher-paying employment. Planning his party for August, he invited all his friends and brothers. As the pressure mounted, he confided in his counselor about his deceptions. He had been lying to his family for a year about working as an engineer at a technology company. The psychologist expressed deep disappointment and advised Brett to come clean to his mother. Though reluctant, Brett eventually told his mother the truth. Her devastation was profound. She had spent years boasting about her wonderful son. She insisted that Brett also confess everything to Kristen, or she would do it herself. His brothers were already aware of the lies and supported their mother's stance. Unable to face telling Kristen the truth himself, a shocking task after barely managing to reveal it to his mother, Brett found himself in an untenable position as the wedding approached. He knew that informing Kristen would prevent the ceremony and considered if honesty might have been better. Facing pressure from all sides, Brett still couldn't admit the truth to Kristen and feared his mother might do so before long. Each time Kristen's phone rang, he tensed up until realizing it was not her discovering the secret, but rather another friend discussing wedding plans. Desperate for resolution and unable to handle the mounting stress any longer, he needed a final solution. He was forbidden to use firearms, so the boy decided that the best way to carry out his plan was to use a crossbow. Besides, it's quite a silent murder weapon. One of his late father's hobbies was bow shooting at targets. He taught Brett how to. Yes, Brett was good at target shooting, though it was unlikely his late father thought his son would use that skill in such a manner. Brett bought a crossbow and arrows at a sporting goods store and hid it behind the construction debris lying in Susan's garage. At home, he arranged what he thought was an ingenious alibi invention. He tied a spoon to a fan and set the fan on a timer. When the timer went off, the fan turned on and the spoon moved across the computer keyboard, sending pre-prepared comments to YouTube. From an outsider's perspective, it must have seemed like Brett had spent all day at home watching videos and commenting on them. On the morning of August 25th, Brett dressed in strange clothes that hid his face, left the house through the back door to avoid security cameras, and took a train to his parents' house. His aim was to eliminate anyone who might disrupt his and Kristen's well-being once and for all. Susan was very surprised at her son's unexpected arrival. She had not been feeling well that day, but Brett, despite his mother's condition, began once again to persuade her, and even demand, that she not tell his future wife anything. The mother categorically refused him. Then Brett began to get angry. Susan sensed something wrong seeing her son's mad eyes, and warned him that she had already called Christopher, and he was on his way. Brett went berserk. He ran to the garage to get the crossbow, but found that his anger and adrenaline overflowed him with such force that he couldn't even make a shot. Instead, he bludgeoned his mother with the butt of the gun, and finally ensured she was dead by tightening a rope around her neck. After throwing plastic bags over the body, Brett loaded the crossbow with arrows and hid in the bushes, waiting for his brother to arrive. After a while, Christopher arrived and started calling for their mother or brother, but received no response. Only an arrow shot from behind which pierced his neck, causing him to die within minutes. The next victim was Alexander, their youngest brother. As it turns out, Susan had managed to call him too before everything happened. He was also shot in the neck, but either the arrow did not penetrate deeply or it missed vital arteries. Thus, Alexander did not die immediately, but began to scream and call for help. During this time, Leland was in the house, sleeping in his room on the second floor. He had no idea of the carnage occurring in the garage and garden, much less that his own brother was committing the crime. Leland's sleep was disturbed by a scream. Coming downstairs, he saw Brett trying to strangle Alexander. A fight broke out between Leland and Brett. As soon as Leland gained the upper hand and managed to push Brett aside, he ran to the neighbors and called the police. Brett stayed in the house. He had nowhere to run. He realized this was the moment he had completely ruined his life. With nothing else to do, he took out his phone and wrote Kristen a letter asking her to forgive him. When the police arrived at the crime scene, they saw a bloody Brett sitting next to his equally bloody, but still alive brother Alexander, who would later die in the hospital. Brett himself asked the policeman to handcuff him and take him to the station where he confessed everything. Brett also informed them that his mother's body was hidden under packages in the garage, but it was impossible to help her. At both the police station and later at trial, Brett admitted that he did not intend to kill Susan. His plan was merely to scare her. However, he did plan to kill Christopher and Alexander that day since they were witnesses, and if they hadn't arrived, they would still be alive. Almost 10 years ago, he tried justifying everything with his depressive state, but it did not soften his sentence. Despite acknowledging that Brett confessed everything on his own accord and did not hinder the investigation in any way, the judge sentenced him to 3 life terms, 1 for each murder, with parole eligibility in 2041. As for Leland, he is not speaking to reporters but is known throughout Toronto as the sole survivor of that dreadful incident. The case of Savannah Gold. In 2017, Sherry's world was turned upside down in Florida when her daughter Savannah failed to show up for work at the restaurant where she was employed. Sherry was unaware that this ordinary day would be the last time she'd see Savannah. An hour later, the restaurant called Sherry to inform her that Savannah hadn't arrived for her shift, which was unusual since she had never missed work before. However, the events that unfolded after that call were even more bizarre. When Savannah's father received a message on her behalf, riddled with spelling mistakes and lacking punctuation, he instantly knew it wasn't his 21-year-old daughter who had written it. The impersonator claimed Savannah had met an amazing guy, fallen in love and decided to elope with him, promising to call later. Savannah's father, Daniel Gold, carefully read the text message, paying close attention to its content. He knew his daughter well and was convinced that running away with her boyfriend was out of character for her. While Daniel studied his phone screen, trying to make sense of the message, Savannah's older brother Chris received a similar text, saying she was leaving with her boyfriend and that she was okay. Daniel's instincts told him something was wrong, so he immediately started calling his daughter's phone, only to find it turned off. Savannah Page Gold was born on April 26, 1996, to Daniel and Sherry Gold. She lived with her parents and older brother, Chris, in Jacksonville, Florida. Savannah enjoyed various hobbies, including playing lacrosse, drawing, and dancing. Those close to her believed she embodied her last name, being a loving, kind, and caring person always willing to help others. After graduating from high school, Savannah turned down a college scholarship for art and design to care for her mother, Sherry, who had been diagnosed with cancer and was undergoing chemotherapy. To support her mother, Savannah took on household responsibilities and also worked as a waiter at Bonefish Grill, a restaurant. By the summer of 2017, she had been working at the restaurant for 2 years. On August 2nd, Savannah left for work at around 5 p.m. wearing her uniform, as her shift was scheduled to start at 5:30 p.m. However, less than an hour later, Sherry received a call from the restaurant asking why Savannah had not shown up for work. This surprised Sherry, as she knew her daughter was responsible and had seen her leave the house in her uniform, indicating that she had indeed gone to work. After Savannah's father received a suspicious phone call, her father and brother started getting strange messages that they didn't think were from her. They suspected someone was impersonating Savannah. Before this, Savannah's father had tried to contact the police, but he couldn't reach his daughter. She was reported missing, and the police launched a search for her. Since sending those messages, Savannah's phone and social media accounts have been inactive. The police first went to the establishment where she worked to investigate. They found her unlocked car in the parking lot, about 120 yards from the restaurant entrance. Her personal documents, wallet, cards, cash, and other valuable items were still inside the car. It was clear to the police that the story about Savannah running away with her lover was a lie. If Savannah had planned to disappear, she would have taken her documents and bank cards with her to avoid being traced. It didn't make sense that she would leave them behind in her car. Initially, there were no signs of a struggle or crime near or inside the car, except for the flat left front tire. Forensic experts were called to investigate, and detectives visited the restaurant to speak with Savannah's coworkers. However, they all claimed that Savannah hadn't come to work that day, and that no one had seen her. The presence of Savannah's car parked 120 yards from the restaurant led detectives to suspect that something might have happened to her after she arrived at work. They began canvassing local establishments, particularly those with surveillance cameras, to review the footage and identify the moment Savannah parked her car. Although the image quality was poor, the police were able to see from the footage that Savannah parked her car, got out, and walked to a nearby silver Chevrolet Malibu sedan. For 14 minutes, she stood next to the driver's door, talking to the person behind the wheel. She then opened the back door and got in, and the driver followed suit. The police watched as the car shook, and the back door swung open 3 times before being closed again. Officers suspected that a fight had broken out inside the car between Savannah and the Chevrolet's owner. Shortly after, the man exited the car, approached Savannah's vehicle, opened the driver's door, and removed something from inside. He then punctured the front left tire, got back into his vehicle, and drove away without Savannah ever getting out. The owner of the Chevrolet Malibu was quickly identified as Lee Rodarte, a 28-year-old manager and chef at the restaurant where Savannah worked. He had helped distribute flyers with Savannah's picture during the police investigation and claimed not to have seen her for about 3 weeks, citing their different work shifts. However, when detectives re-interviewed restaurant employees, they discovered that Lee and Savannah's relationship went beyond a professional one. Several people came forward to reveal that the two had met secretly after hours and were romantically involved, a fact that Lee had failed to disclose to the police. On August 5th, during his work shift, Rodarte was arrested and taken to the police station for questioning. When he arrived, he immediately warned the detectives that he struggled with reading and writing. In response, they thoroughly explained his rights, including his right to an attorney and the fact that anything he said could be used against him in court. Rodarte then admitted that he had previously lied to the police when they interviewed the restaurant staff, saying he hadn't seen Savannah in a long time. In reality, he had seen her on the day she went missing, but he was afraid that if he told the truth, he would become a suspect in her disappearance, which is why he had lied. Lee said he had met Savannah about 2 years ago when she started working at the restaurant. However, their socializing outside of work began around 8 months ago. At that time, he was already in a relationship with someone named Chelsea. When Chelsea discovered he had been unfaithful to her, she ended their relationship. Rodarte claims he dated Savannah for 3 months before she started using illegal drugs, which led him to end their relationship and reunite with Chelsea. Following the breakup, Rodarte and Savannah allegedly agreed to maintain a professional relationship, limited to their work at the restaurant, as per company policy prohibiting romantic relationships among employees. Rodarte also states that Savannah had disclosed their intimate relationship to other waiters with the intention of getting him fired. Lee last saw Savannah on a Wednesday afternoon. He drove to the mall on August 2nd to talk to her and persuade her not to spread rumors about their relationship as he feared losing his job at the restaurant where he had worked for 5 years. When he met her, Savannah had just taken a strong substance and was panicking, so she asked if she could sit in his car for a bit. Once inside, he demanded that she stop telling people they were still dating. Savannah asked him to join her in the back seat so they could talk. After moving to the back seat, Lee again asked Savannah to stop spreading rumors, but she refused, saying she would do as she pleased. This response infuriated Lee, who then got out, slashed a tire on Savannah's car and returned. When Savannah asked why he had done it, Lee admitted he was upset and angry. Next, as Rodarte claimed, Savannah exited his vehicle and headed towards the mall entrance, but didn't reach it. Instead, she got into an old green Ford pickup truck with tinted windows. At this point, she was holding her phone. However, detectives were aware that Savannah never left Rodarte's car and that he was lying. Unbeknownst to Rodarte, the police had surveillance footage that disproved his claim, showing no Ford pickup truck and Savannah remaining in his car. When asked about subsequent events, Lee stated that he drove home, even detailing the streets he took. Notably, the man had scratches on his arms and neck, which he attributed to a workplace injury when questioned about their origin. When detectives directly asked Rodarte about Savannah's whereabouts, he claimed to have no knowledge. The detectives adjusted their questioning strategy. At first, they listened attentively to his stories, showing interest, but soon they applied gentle pressure. They informed him straightforwardly that evidence contradicted his claim that Savannah had exited his car. After a brief time, Rodarte altered his statement, asserting that he and Savannah had gone to his residence, and then she departed. The detectives remained skeptical and urged him to reveal the entire truth, considering Savannah's family's well-being. Rodarte ultimately admitted to fatally snapping Savannah's neck during a backseat argument in his vehicle. Following their departure from the parking lot, he sent messages to Savannah's father and brother from her phone, before discarding it out the window. Rodarte returned the body to his property, intending to dispose of it by fire, but he soon discovered it wasn't as simple as he thought. Instead, he dug a hole and buried the body, only to later exhume it, wrap it in a blanket, and drive approximately 8 miles from the restaurant to a nearby pond where he discarded the body. Although the autopsy couldn't determine the exact cause of Savannah's death, the examination revealed that her neck wasn't broken, as Rodarte had claimed, and no illegal substances were found in her body. However, forensic experts discovered that the thyroid cartilage in Savannah's throat was fractured, suggesting strangulation, and roughly 75% of her body exhibited fire damage. Despite confessing to the crimes, Rodarte maintained his not guilty plea on charges of second-degree murder, tampering with evidence, and abuse of a dead body. The autopsy revealed that the condition of Savannah's body was too compromised to determine an exact cause of death. Contrary to Rodarte's claims, her neck was not broken and no illegal substances were found in her system. However, the autopsy did indicate that Savannah was strangled as her thyroid cartilage was broken and approximately 75% of her body had been burned. Rodarte's confession was revoked at trial, where he claimed he acted in self-defense, alleging that Savannah had initiated the strangulation. This reversal put Savannah's family through additional trauma, forcing them to attend numerous court hearings. Sherry Gold, Savannah's mother, has battled recurring cancer during this ordeal, but she remains committed to attending every hearing alongside her family. They have been present at 26 out of 27 hearings, enduring the emotional toll of facing Rodarte, the man responsible for their daughter's death. The family's primary concern now is to bring this painful process to a close and secure justice for Savannah. Lee Rodarte was not the only family member to be charged with murder. In 2016, a year before Lee committed his crime, his sister Amber Camarillo, then 26, and still known by her maiden name Rodarte, shot and killed a woman during a dispute over a car. She received a 20-year prison sentence. Lee Rodarte was offered a plea deal, which required him to plead guilty to second-degree murder in exchange for a 40-year prison sentence. In return, the charges of tampering with physical evidence and abuse of the body would be dropped. After consulting with his attorneys, Rodarte accepted the deal and was sentenced to 40 years in prison on March 11, 2021. Following the verdict, Savannah's family expressed gratitude to everyone for their support. Daniel Gold stated that they loved Savannah and were overwhelmed to discover how many others also cared for her. The case of Shannon Starbuck. Shannon Starbuck, a 42-year-old woman, was born on April 19, 1969, in Anderson, Indiana, as the youngest child with two older brothers. Her parents eventually divorced and started new families, resulting in additional siblings for Shannon. On December 3, 2011, Shannon was discovered on the floor of her bedroom, positioned in a suggestive manner. An erotic massager was placed on her stomach, indicating a clear attempt to humiliate her after death. The police immediately suspected foul play due to the numerous bruises and scrapes on her body. A medical examiner later confirmed that some of the injuries were caused by a stun gun, and evidence suggested that her body had been moved. The official cause of death was determined to be strangulation. The detectives assigned to solve the case faced a difficult task. They needed to reconstruct the final hours of Shannon's life and identify the perpetrator. Shannon, a mother of 5, had been reported missing by her ex-husband, Clay Starbuck, a day before her body was found. Clay, 47, had alerted the authorities that he had been unable to contact Shannon since December 1st at approximately 3 p.m. Shannon sent a text to her daughter saying she couldn't pick up the kids from school because she wasn't feeling well. She asked them to wait for their father, claiming she had already informed him of the change in plans. However, his phone was turned off, so he didn't know what was going on. The younger siblings, Marshall and Serena, were tired and hungry, so 15-year-old Logan decided to call her older brother Austin for help. She asked him to drive them to their father's house, which was just a couple of blocks away. When they arrived, Austin said he couldn't reach their mother either. He thought maybe she had turned off her phone to rest. Austin put the kids in the car and drove them to their father's house. Clay was surprised to see them but was happy to spend time with his kids, since the older kids had lived with him after the divorce, and the younger ones had stayed with their mother. Clay decided to enjoy the unexpected visit and didn't contact Shannon. This wasn't the first time something like this had happened with her. Clay expected to see Shannon at the school basketball game that evening, but she didn't show up. The next day, December 2nd, Clay took the kids to school and then went to Shannon's house. The front door was locked and the blinds were closed. Since he didn't have a spare key, he couldn't get in. Clay sent a message saying that if Shannon didn't show up by 7 p.m., he would contact the police. After waiting until the agreed time, Clay went to the police station to report Sean in Starbuck's disappearance. 2 sheriff's deputies visited her address but found nothing suspicious, so they returned to the station. The officer told Clay to wait one more day. If he still hadn't heard from Shannon after that, he should return to the station. The next day, Clay returned to the police station, and it was then that he discovered he wasn't the only one looking for Shannon. A friend and her mother had also reported being unable to contact her, which was unusual for Shannon. This new information prompted the police to take the case more seriously. It had been 48 hours since Shannon's disappearance, and several people were worried about her. The police visited Shannon's home again. Upon entering the residence, they found no signs of forced entry or robbery. Initially, everything appeared to be in order. However, when they entered Shannon's bedroom, they discovered the disturbing truth. Shannon Starbuck's disappearance was a result of a brutal murder. In her room, investigators found an unmade bed with a blanket nearby, but the sheet was missing, and the mattress cover had red stains. Her cell phone and diary were on the dresser. Forensic experts examined the room for fingerprints, finding 12 latent prints on the massager box and bathroom mirror, while some surfaces had been wiped clean. DNA analysis was conducted on traces found in common areas, and specialists took scrapings from under Shannon's nails, face, and neck. Detectives believed the murder occurred after Shannon got out of the shower and her body was moved to the bed and then the floor. The missing sheet was found in the washing machine, suggesting the perpetrator tried to eliminate evidence. Clay arrived at Shannon's house by noon to find out what had happened to his ex-wife. However, the scene at her yard was ominous, with yellow tape cordoning off the area, an ambulance, and several police cars parked near the lawn. Clay was the first to be informed of the tragic event. To gather more information about Shannon and her lifestyle, the detectives questioned Clay after he had calmed down. He explained that he and his ex-wife had a morning routine where he would take the younger kids to school and she would pick them up afterwards. However, on December 1st, his car broke down a few blocks from home, disrupting their routine. Clay had texted Shannon to ask her to take the kids to school. It was supposed to warm up around 11 a.m., but when he tried to start the car again, it still wouldn't start. He gave up and went back inside to take a nap. Clay slept for several hours without being disturbed, during which time his cell phone ran out of battery. To support his story, he showed the police his correspondence with his ex-wife, Shannon. Initially, everything seemed to add up. Clay was cooperative, providing his cell phone, DNA, and fingerprints. He also expressed concern for Shannon, explaining that their divorce had made her more vulnerable. When asked for more information, Clay revealed that Shannon had joined a dating site after becoming single. As an attractive woman, she had many admirers. According to Clay, she might have been seeing multiple people at the same time, and one of them might have been responsible for her death. Unfortunately, he didn't have any specific names to share. During the conversation, Clay became emotional and cried, struggling to accept Shannon's death. After recording his statement, the police sent him home. He had to break the news of their mother's death to their children. At the start of the investigation, the case surrounding Shannon Starbuck's demise was gathering momentum. Investigators questioned the Shannon family's neighbors, focusing on every detail, especially reports of unfamiliar people and vehicles in recent weeks. An autopsy revealed severe injuries, including chest trauma consistent with the use of a stun gun, 10 broken ribs, and head and body injuries likely caused by a blunt object. The severity of the injuries made it difficult to determine the exact time of death, but the expert estimated that Shannon's life ended between December 1st, 2002. Scratches on her body suggested that she had been moved, and her broken neck bone supported this theory. The medical examiner found evidence of strangulation using a soft object, possibly a hand, towel, or sheet. A breakthrough in the case came from the analysis of body samples, which revealed male DNA. This suggested that the suspect might be one of Shannon's close male acquaintances, including her ex-husband or secret admirers. Clay Starbuck, her ex-husband, has cooperated fully with the investigation, including undergoing a medical examination to check for any injuries or harm. Detectives suspected that the perpetrator might have been injured during the struggle, but Clay showed no signs of injury on his hands. The investigators then examined their sons, 21-year-old Austin and 18-year-old Blake. The only issue that arose was the presence of old cuts on the older son's hands, but these were explained by his job at a window manufacturing plant. During conversations with the sons, some facts were established that would later become clearer. The children knew that after the divorce, their mother had been dating and they disapproved of it. They had seen explicit photos on their mother's laptop, leading them to wonder if she might have been targeted by an online predator. It was clear that the sons loved their mother and were deeply shaken by her death. However, they had disagreed with the changes she had been making in her life. In a subsequent interview, Clay expressed himself more clearly. He blamed Shannon's behavior for his family's problems while he was away on business, especially her frequent encounters with other men. Clay even suspected that Marshall might not be his biological son, but he loved him regardless. Clay believed that after their relationship ended, Shannon started to indulge excessively and not appropriately for her age. He disapproved of her dropping off the kids at his place when she went on dates. By this point, investigators had not only spoken to Clay and the children but also interviewed Shannon's relatives and friends. The detectives developed a more comprehensive understanding of the deceased and her family. Shannon had always dreamed of having a big, loving family. Growing up, she was a kind and modest person who loved to draw and was very good at it, winning many awards. At 20, she met 25-year-old Clay Starbuck in Florida, where she had moved with her family when she was young. Clay was on vacation from Alaska. They were introduced by friends at a party and hit it off right away. That night, Shannon learned a lot about Clay. He had gone to school in Colorado to learn about diesel mechanics and later worked on the Trans-Alaskan pipeline, which paid well. However, he was already married with 2 kids. Despite his complicated past, Shannon wasn't discouraged. She actually saw it as a plus, thinking it gave him valuable experience for their future together. Shannon and Clay got married soon after meeting. As Clay's new wife, she moved in with her husband. At first, she struggled to adjust to her new surroundings in the weather, but she quickly settled in. Shannon's married life wasn't as perfect as she had envisioned. Her husband Clay was often away, leaving her to manage the household by herself. However, her love for him gave her the strength to carry on, knowing that his work shifts would eventually end and he would return to her. In the meantime, she took on the role of mother to his children from his previous marriage and soon gave birth to their own son, Austin, followed by another son, Blake, 3 years later. In 1996, they welcomed a daughter, Logan, who was later diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder. Shannon accepted her daughter's diagnosis with love and care, becoming her closest companion. The family was later completed with the arrival of another daughter, Serena. Shannon devoted herself to her children's well-being, education, and spiritual growth. She was also known for her cooking, crafts, and other hobbies within their community. However, she was so focused on being a caring mother and a loving wife that she didn't realize her husband was having an affair at work. When she discovered his affair, she felt deeply betrayed and shocked. This led her to file for divorce in 2000, marking the beginning of a new chapter in her life. She still had feelings for her ex-husband, so she moved to Arizona to start fresh and eased the pain of their separation. There, she attempted to start a new relationship, but it didn't work out because she realized she still loved her ex, Clay. Clay was also reaching out to her and asking her to come back, claiming he had changed. Believing him, she gave him another chance. In February 2001, they had a son named Marshall, their 5th child. However, instead of strengthening their relationship, Marshall's birth created new tensions. Even when they formally remarried in February 2006, their relationship remained strained. 6 months later, the family moved to Deer Park, Washington. Clay's work kept him away, leaving Shannon to care for the children and manage the household. She kept her family entertained by organizing outings and parties at home. However, the frequent time spent apart put a strain on her marriage, creating doubts and mistrust that eventually led to a permanent separation in February 2010. Crossing into her 40s, Shannon started to rebuild her life with the hope of finding love again. She was determined not to give up or make the same mistakes as before. Even when her ex-husband Clay suffered a serious injury, Shannon chose not to go back to him. However, she still provided him with support and help. In February 2011, Clay quit his job and moved to Deer Park to be closer to his children in Chonman. Although he hoped Chonman would take him back, she didn't feel the same way. She had finally found freedom and was enjoying it. After Clay's surgery, Austin and Blake moved in with him, enjoying more independence from their mother. Shannon started a new chapter, finding a part-time job and enrolling in a dental assistant course to support her family since Clay stopped paying child support due to illness. The children stayed with Clay on Wednesdays and every other weekend. And by summer's end, Shannon completed her certification and was ready for her next goal. Shannon Starbuck had been seeking a fresh start, creating a dating profile in hopes of meeting someone special and leaving her past heartache behind. She regretted spending her best years with a man who didn't appreciate her and was capable of deceit. Tragically, her dreams were cut short one December morning when she became Shannon of a heinous crime. Her funeral, held on December 10, 2011, was attended by a large number of people, a testament to her bright and sincere personality. She was laid to rest at a cemetery in Orlando. The investigation into her death was swift, thanks to public attention. Detectives focused on her ex-husband Clay, verifying his alibi for December 1st. His fingerprints didn't match those at the crime scene, so they checked his story against databases and examined Shannon's phone, laptop, and diary for other potential suspects. Detectives thoroughly examined Shannon's mobile phone, leading them to add several individuals to the list of suspects. These men had been in contact with her through a dating site, raising suspicions about their potential involvement. One suspect, Tom Walker, had arranged a date with Shannon for December 5th, just hours before her death. Their conversations had been candid, and they had exchanged photos. However, when Tom Walker requested that Shannon take a photo using an adult toy, she declined. Notably, her body was later discovered in the exact pose that Tom Walker had mentioned. Within an hour, detectives located Tom Walker, who was shocked not only by the news of Shannon's death, but also by being considered a suspect. He promptly provided an explanation for his activities on the day of her death, which was corroborated by his colleagues in surveillance footage. The next individual on the list was John Wilson, who had scheduled a meeting with Shannon on December 1st. An examination of their correspondence revealed. The investigation revealed that the suitor, whose real name was John Kinlawn, had no intention of a serious relationship with Shannon and had used a fake identity. He was married and worked in a different field than he claimed, which explained his secretive behavior. When questioned, Kinlawn had an alibi for the time of the crime, which was corroborated, and he was released after providing a DNA sample. The investigation was back to square one, but a breakthrough came when detectives examined Shannon's mobile phone. They discovered that a 911 call had been made from the phone on the morning of December 1st, but it had been deleted from the call log. After retrieving the call, they found it contained only the sounds of sobbing and rustling before abruptly ending. Shannon's phone records revealed a failed call and 11 messages sent after her death. GPS data confirmed her phone was at home, where she was killed after dropping her kids at school. The suspect tried to mislead the investigation and was found to be close to the Shannon family, even using a nickname for the youngest son. After uncovering this information, Clay's statements were examined more closely. He had a clear motive for killing his ex-wife, as divorce can be difficult for some partners to accept. Additionally, he had the perfect opportunity, knowing her daily routine. As a result, authorities decided to track the suspect's car route again, this time using footage from street surveillance cameras. This is when the officer's suspicions became clearer. It turned out that Clay's car had not broken down. At the same time, results from another analysis arrived, showing that DNA material collected from Shannon's body matched the suspect's samples exactly. When Shannon returned home, a heated argument broke out, which ultimately led to her death. The unusual position of her body was a deliberate act of vengeance by Clay, who was enraged by her newfound freedom. After the murder, Clay stayed in the house and impersonated Shannon in text messages. It became clear that his intentions to harm her may have been long-standing. A friend's conversation with detectives took on new significance, revealing that Clay and Shannon's relationship was troubled. Shannon had confided in friends that she was tired of Clay's controlling behavior and criticism and had feared he might harm her if she ever left him. In fact, Shannon had contacted the police multiple times between June and November 2011, reporting that Clay was stalking her and making her feel unsafe in her own home. She had become so fearful that she refused to give anyone a spare key to her house. Ultimately, Shannon secured a restraining order against Clay, limiting their communication to text messages. A thorough examination of her diary revealed that she not only feared her former lover but also believed he was manipulating their children against her. Clay had been spreading vicious rumors and portraying her as promiscuous. As a result, when he was arrested on February 6, 2012, the children refused to believe he was involved. The discovery of a tracking program on Shannon's laptop, a hard drive labeled Shannon's desktop computer in Clay's house, and printed correspondences did not seem to disturb them. The older children questioned the authenticity of the DNA analysis, thinking the accusations against their father were unbelievable and the case was fabricated. However, law enforcement and other relatives had a different perspective. At the trial, the prosecution presented a substantial amount of physical evidence and testimonies, confidently demonstrating Clay's guilt. In June 2013, justice was served when Clay Starbuck was found guilty of first-degree deprivation of life under aggravating circumstances and disrespect to human remains. He was sentenced to life without parole. His 2015 appeal was denied. He's serving time in Spokane County. Shannon's family grieves her loss, but the children siding with their father hurts more. His obsession led to revenge, leaving the children without a mother or father. Helen Milner was born around 1964 in New Zealand to her mother, Anne Milner, and frequently spoke about how hard it was to raise Helen, who had been a difficult child from early on. By age 10, Helen was already getting into serious trouble, a pattern that would follow her throughout life, and kept a written record of Helen's offenses, many of which were quite severe. Helen went to high school in Christchurch, the largest city on New Zealand's South Island, known for its English-style heritage. Though she attended a well-regarded school, Helen stole from classmates and withdrew large amounts of money from her mother's account. Her mother chose not to press charges, and fellow students did not report her to authorities. But the school ultimately expelled her. Worried about her daughter's future, and enrolled Helen in Ritchie Secretarial College. After finishing, Helen worked as a typist but was fired for submitting a fake letter from the Ministry of Health that falsely allowed smoking in the staff room. She later worked as a cashier at United Building Society, a New Zealand-based lender, but was dismissed for theft. Once more, her mother repaid the stolen money and spent thousands to keep her daughter out of prison and court. Nevertheless, Helen continued down a troubled road. She moved to Wellington with a fiancé, but the relationship ended badly. leaving her in debt and returning to Christchurch. Financial issues persisted. Helen often exploited her family, stealing from her disabled aunt and taking money from her father's wallet. In her early 20s, Helen met Mark Robert Kearns. They married around 1987 and had 2 sons, Greg and Adam. The marriage dissolved in the mid-1990s in a bitter divorce, followed by a tough custody dispute. Mark claimed Helen was manipulative, driven by money or self-interest, and showed no empathy. He alleged that she lied in court to get custody and told the boys their father had moved to Australia and didn't want to see them. Despite spending over $20,000 on legal fees, Mark found it hard to stay in touch with his sons until they were old enough to contact him on their own, by which time the bond was deeply damaged. Details of Helen's life after the divorce are unclear until 2005, when she married Philip Nisbet. Phil was born on March 20th, 1962. He was the eldest of 4 siblings. As the eldest, Phil was always protective and caring toward his siblings, especially his youngest sister. At some point, the Nisbets moved to Australia, but Phil chose to stay in New Zealand. He worked as a truck driver, a demanding but reasonably well-paid job. He was married to a woman named Vicky, with whom he had his eldest son, Zach. After their separation, he formed a relationship with Karen, which produced his younger son, Ben. This relationship also ended, leaving Phil single again as he entered his 40s. The specifics of how Phil and Helen met remain unclear, but it is evident that both had experienced failed marriages and had children from previous relationships. Their happiness together was well documented in family photos shared on social media, showing them smiling and evidently in love. They got married in 2005. Initially, everything seemed perfect, and their families were pleased to see them rebuilding their lives. However, not everything was flawless, and like any couple, they had their difficulties. Even Helen's family blamed her for generating conflicts, as Phil avoided confrontations. Helen and her sister-in-law, Lee Ann, had a falling out in 2006, leading to a permanent rift. There are 2 versions of the story behind their disagreement. One version suggests that Lee Ann's teenage son, Lance, had stayed with Phil and Helen, and after an incident that upset Helen, she called her sister-in-law to complain, resulting in an argument. The other version claims that Lance reported to his mother about a nefarious plan that his uncle Phil was allegedly plotting under Helen's influence to harm his ex-partner, Karen. Lee Ann confronted Phil about the absurd plan and took her son out of Phil's house. Despite this, Lee Ann continued to love her brother, but regretted the distance that grew between them. Although things seemed fine, or at least Phil thought so, Helen had grown tired of the relationship. She spoke ill of him behind his back and complained about not being free. Sometimes, she openly fantasized in front of her co-workers about becoming a widow. However, she never mentioned divorce. On April 15, 2009, Phil fainted at work and was taken to the hospital. Doctors were unsure of the cause but suspected an allergic reaction to a spider or insect bite during a recent visit to Australia for his birthday. His condition improved and he was sent home. But that night, he fell ill again. Helen informed her younger son that she would take Phil back to the hospital. In the days that followed, Adam spoke to Phil about something odd he had noticed the night Phil's condition worsened. He told Phil that his mother had been holding some empty capsules and tried to hide them from view. Despite being Helen's son, Adam warned his stepfather to be cautious, suggesting that his mother might poison him. Phil, trusting and unwilling to believe such a thing, reassured Adam that he had nothing to worry about and must have been mistaken. This incident was the final straw for Adam, who moved out the next day, unwilling to remain in a toxic environment. For about 3 weeks, life returned to normal, with everyone going about their routines without health issues. On May 3, 2009, Phil, a loving father, texted his younger son, Ben, before bed, informing him that he had washed his hoodie and would bring it to him the next day. However, Phil did not wake up that morning. On May 4, 2009, Helen called the police, reporting that her husband, Phil, was dead in their home. The police responded quickly, as it was a slow day with an available patrol. Helen, in tears, opened the door and led the officers to the master bedroom, where they found Phil's body lying diagonally on the bed, eyes open and not breathing. The officers noticed 2 empty packets of pills and a half-empty glass of water on the nightstand. Helen's crying intensified, but something about her made the officers keep their distance. They called their superiors to report the scene and notify Phil's family. With the phone in her hand, Helen reported that her husband had taken his own life and that she had evidence to prove it. The police took the phone and saw a message on the screen seemingly sent by Phil. The message expressed Phil's sorrow, stating he couldn't go on, that he loved her very much, and asked her to take care of herself and tell Ben that he loved him. The message was dated May 3rd and sent at 10:30 p.m. The lead officer on the scene was notified of everything that transpired during their investigation. Meanwhile, Phil's body was taken to the morgue in hopes that the autopsy would shed light on the situation. Lee Ann described the moment she received the call from her father, informing her that Phil had ended his life as terrible. Despite not speaking to her brother much over the past 2 years due to her argument with Helen, she never imagined Phil would make such a drastic decision. Days later, when the preliminary autopsy report was released, it was revealed that Phil's body contained high levels of an anti-allergic drug that paradoxically caused him a severe allergic reaction. At that moment, Lee Ann felt she had to accept that her brother had decided to end it all, but something in her spirit rebelled against this notion. From then on, significant events unfolded, but the police seemed fixated on the idea that Phil's death was self-inflicted, causing delays in the investigation. Then, something almost unheard of in criminal cases occurred. The perpetrator's own family accused her. On May 13th, the couple's relatives went to the police station. They expressed their suspicions that Helen had tried to kill her husband 3 weeks before the fatal outcome. However, this lead was not immediately pursued. Another notable event was that during May, Helen began exchanging text messages with an ex-boyfriend named Barry. Surprisingly, Barry moved into the home Helen and her recently deceased husband had shared just a few weeks later. By this time, Lee Ann had re-established contact with Helen, as Phil's death necessitated conversations and reconciliation. In one of their talks, Helen mentioned a farewell letter that Phil had left, which she found when she opened the safe. She read the letter and promised to show it to Lee Ann when they met in person. A little over a month after her brother's death, Lee Ann flew from Australia to New Zealand for 2 reasons. One was to celebrate her son's 20th birthday, and the other was to discreetly investigate Phil's death. Helen offered her a place to stay, and she accepted. The night of her arrival, Helen greeted her with a vodka glass in one hand and the supposed farewell note in the other, typed on office paper and signed with Phil scribbled at the bottom. Lee Ann immediately thought it didn't look like her brother's signature but remained silent, focusing on the letter's content. Phil claimed he had discovered that Ben was not his biological son and could not face him again. Additionally, Helen mentioned finding a small black book Phil supposedly kept, detailing affairs with other women and a guide on becoming a gigolo. Though angered by the negative image Helen was trying to paint of her brother, Lee Ann had to pretend not to arouse suspicion. She said she disapproved of Phil's decision to take his own life and would go to bed to be in good condition for the next day, when the family would gather at a restaurant to celebrate Lance's 20th birthday. That day, when Helen returned from work, she was furious, carrying the mail in her hand. Karen, Ben's mother, had written to request Ben's belongings from the house and some money Phil had left for his younger son. Filled with rage, Helen declared she would put Karen in her place, claiming Ben wasn't Phil's son and announcing that they would not be attending Lance's birthday celebration. Although Lee Ann disagreed with Helen's behavior, she chose to remain silent, not wanting to provoke her. She needed to stay close and observe everything she could, as she continued to suspect foul play in her brother's death. That evening, Barry, Helen's new boyfriend, dropped off the 2 women at the restaurant where they would celebrate Lance's birthday. Upon arriving, they met Zach, Phil's eldest son, who was with Vicky, his mother, and her partner. Helen was extremely courteous to them, even inviting Zach to her house the following weekend to sort through his father's belongings and take what he wanted. Lee Ann later remarked that she could hardly focus on Lance's celebration with everything happening before her eyes. She couldn't understand why Ben was treated so poorly while Zach was offered his father's possessions. It also struck her as odd that Ben was mentioned in Phil's last messages, but Zach was not. She suspected that Phil had not taken his own life and that Helen had written the notes to sow discord between the brothers, but she couldn't prove it. Before returning to Australia, Lee Ann went to the police and provided all this information. She found it suspicious that Helen was already living with her new boyfriend in the house she had shared with Phil. Following the accusations from Helen's own family and Lee Ann's statements, the police requested Helen to provide the supposed farewell note from her husband. She submitted it on July 6, 2009, but notably, Phil's scrawled signature was missing. Meanwhile, Helen's relationship with Barry was progressing rapidly. On July 12, 2009, he gifted her a gold ring with a diamond worth over $2,000. Helen wore it proudly on her ring finger but insisted it was not an engagement ring, as Barry had not proposed when he gave it to her. Throughout 2009, Helen continued her deceitful ways. Between January and September, she had been stealing from her employer, although no one knew at the time. In 2010, amid multiple requests from Phil's family to clarify the circumstances of his death, the police summoned Helen for another statement. On January 30th, she made her second statement. By then, her depiction of an ideal marriage from her first interview had changed significantly. She told the detective that she never claimed her husband was a good man. When asked about the note explaining his decision, she stated that the police had found it in his briefcase and that the handwritten signature resembled Phil's writing. The investigator reminded her that the letter she submitted to the station had no signature. Helen quickly responded that she had kept a copy and hadn't looked at it for so long that she mistakenly believed it was signed. Helen also expressed that Phil's family had turned against her, claiming it was unfair. Known for her vengeful nature, in March 2010, she bought a mobile phone and sent herself threatening messages, pretending they were from her son, Adam. This was her way of retaliating after learning he had backed his grandmother when alerting the police about how dangerous Helen could be. She accused Adam of sending death threats to his ex-girlfriend, suggesting he had violated a restraining order, and claimed he was extremely aggressive, making her fear for her safety. Due to these serious allegations from his mother, Adam was detained for over 15 days until it was revealed that everything was a fabrication of Helen's twisted mind. Helen's luck seemed to turn in late 2010. In October, she was sentenced to 5 months of house arrest after being found guilty of stealing from her employer between January 2009. Concurrently, Leanne's persistence bore fruit, leading to a forensic investigation into Phil's death starting in November 2010. Leanne had requested permission to review some evidence for the court case, and it was granted. Leanne brought a folder of documents with Phil's signature for comparison with the farewell letter. The judge showed her and her brother the letter. Leanne practically snatched it from the judge's hand upon seeing it lacked a signature, displaying her anger and disappointment at what she saw as another of Helen's attempts to evade responsibility. The subsequent court investigation highlighted the police's failings in investigating Phil's death, Helen's history of law violations, and mounting evidence that Phil had not taken his own life but was a victim of foul play. On the stand, Helen described her husband as very nervous and easily agitated, recounting their trip to Australia in March 2009 for Phil's birthday. During that trip, he had been bitten by an insect, taken a low dose of Phenergan, and remained unconscious for at least 6 hours, discovering his severe allergy to the medication. Helen added that the day before his death, they had a pleasant time shopping, having lunch, and discussing future projects for the house. They had dinner, watched TV, and Phil showered and went to bed around 9:30 p.m. According to Helen, she joined him an hour later, kissed him goodnight, and went to sleep. The investigation in court lasted 6 months, with various pieces of evidence presented and thoroughly analyzed. On May 12, 2011, the judge presented her conclusions, stating there was insufficient evidence to prove Phil intended to take his own life. This conclusion paved the way for a homicide investigation. The investigators took an immediate interest in the case and launched a murder inquiry that lasted several months. On October 27, 2011, Helen was arrested and charged with murder and attempted murder. In the meantime, Helen continued facing legal repercussions for her other actions. In August 2012, she was sentenced to 2 years and 8 months in prison for sending herself insulting text messages, pretending they were from her son. In March 2010, she was denied parole. The murder trial began on December 12, 2013. The Crown's prosecution spent 2 weeks presenting evidence from over 70 witnesses, asserting that Helen attempted to kill her husband twice, succeeding on the second attempt using doses of the anti-allergy and sedative drug, Phenergan. The motive was believed to be financial, as Helen intended to claim Phil's $250,000 life insurance policy. The financial advisor who sold the policy to the couple in 2008 testified that Phil was present when the policy was purchased, but he suspected Helen filled out the entire form on her husband's behalf. It was also revealed that the insurance policy had a 13-month exclusion clause for voluntary death, which expired in March 2009, just before Helen's alleged attempts on Phil's life. The Crown recounted Helen's purchase of the medication to which Phil was allergic using false names and addresses. They suggested she mixed the drug into Phil's food and, after he was sedated, suffocated him. She then manipulated the scene, sending the fake farewell text and writing the typed note. A DNA test confirmed that the claim about Ben not being Phil's biological son was false. Colleagues of Helen testified that she frequently talked about poisons and her desire to suffocate her husband. A pivotal moment in the trial was Adam's testimony. He recalled visiting the police station with his grandmother on May 13, 2009 after Helen had expressed her desire to kill Phil and even suggested hiring a hitman. When Adam asked why she didn't divorce Phil instead, Helen responded that she didn't want to lose half of the house. Adam recounted seeing his mother in the kitchen on April 15, 2009 with 2 transparent capsules filled with a pale blue powder, which she nervously hid when he noticed. She claimed Phil had a headache. That night, Helen took Phil to the hospital. The next day, Adam warned his stepfather about what he had seen, but Phil dismissed his concerns. The first officer on the scene noted that Helen's prolonged emotional display seemed unnatural. He and his colleague found it suspicious that the farewell text was discovered precisely when they were at the house. Helen's explanation that she stayed in bed with Phil until 2 a.m., then moved to the sofa after taking insulin, was also dubious, as Phil's body was positioned in a way that made it unlikely she had been beside him. Additionally, the farewell text was sent at 10:30 p.m., contradicting her timeline. In court, it was revealed that Helen's mother had written a letter requesting Helen's removal from her will and had accompanied Adam to the police to report Phil's suspected murder. Anne's letter stated that she finally faced the truth about her daughter, describing Helen as either mentally ill or simply evil. The defense maintained that Phil had taken his own life and argued that the Crown's case was based on orchestrated and arbitrary evidence. The Crown presented a circumstantial but solid case, while the defense lawyer warned against convicting Helen based on what he considered subjective evidence. The police admitted initial investigative failings, stating the case should have been treated as a homicide from the start. A jury of 7 men and 5 women deliberated for half a day before rejecting the defense's claim that Phil had taken his own life. They found Helen guilty of murder but not guilty of attempted murder. Helen, then 50, reacted calmly as the jury delivered their verdict. In February 2014, the sentencing hearing for Helen took place at the Christchurch High Court. The judge addressed Helen directly, stating that she committed the crime purely for financial gain, and because she wanted to rid herself of a husband she no longer desired in her life. He added that her actions were even more reprehensible because Phil was an exceptionally kind man who had given her no reason to take his life. The judge agreed with the Crown's assertion that Helen's actions were calculated and cold, describing them as a meticulously planned and executed scheme with cruel disregard for Phil's family and friends. Ultimately, Helen was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum of 17 years before being eligible for parole for causing Phil's death in 2009 to claim a $250,000 life insurance payout. One of the consequences of the trial was the tarnishing of the police's reputation for initially adhering to the idea of a self-inflicted fatal injury despite indicators of foul play. The media highlighted this issue, which the public deemed crucial. Reports revealed an internal document exposing fundamental flaws in the initial investigation. After the sentencing, Mark Kearns, Helen's first husband, broke his silence, stating that Helen nearly destroyed his relationship with their children. He said he was trying to rebuild his bond with Greg, 25, and Adam, 23, understanding the need to move past the past. Adam, who had filed a civil lawsuit against his mother for falsely accusing him of harassment, won the case in 2014. He argued that Helen's actions caused him pain, distress, humiliation, and financial loss due to his unjust 15-day imprisonment. Helen was ordered to pay Adam Kearns $55,000. However, Helen's impact on Adam's life led to further legal troubles. He faced charges for cannabis sale and illegal possession of a shotgun and appeared in the media for assaulting Justin Marshall, a former New Zealand Super Rugby champion from the early 2000s. Leanne's persistence ensured that Phil's murder did not go unpunished. After the intense legal battle, she, a single mother of 4 living in Australia, wrote a book about the case, published in 2016. By then, she had also started studying criminology and justice at the University of the Sunshine Coast in Queensland, hoping to work in the criminal justice system to improve the arduous and stressful path for other victims.